Boa noite a todos, todas e todes. É com muito prazer que recebemos Zukiswa Wanner. A gente é intérprete de Libras, Felipe Almeida Freitas, Helenilda Ferreira da Silva, e intérprete de inglês, Shirley Gavai. Isso. Eu vou fazer minha autodescrição. Eu sou uma mulher negra, cabelo curto, com cachinhos, né? Tô de colar de pérola e brinco de pérola, blusa laranja, casaco preto e calça preta. Ok. O fone? Sou eu que estou falando. Eu estou aqui atrapalhada. A gente recebe, então, a escritora, Vozes Africanas Contemporâneas, Desafio, Resistência e o Futuro da Narrativa Global. Esse evento é um evento feito pela PROAD, que é a Pró-Reitoria de Ações Afirmativas, Diversidade e Equidade, e também contamos com o apoio de toda a Unesp e um apoio enorme da editora da Unesp e da Universidade do Livro. Então, com muito prazer que eu vou fazer a descrição da Zukiswa. É uma jornalista, romancista, editora sul-africana, nascida na Zâmbia e agora radicada no Quênia. Desde 2006, quando publicou seu primeiro livro, seus romances foram pré-selecionados para prêmios, incluindo o Prêmio de Literatura Sul-Africana e o Prêmio dos Escritores. Em 2015, ela ganhou o Prêmio Literário Memorial Castelo Duker, por Londres, Cidade do Cabo, Joanesburgo, 2014. Em 2014, Wanner foi nomeada na lista dos 39 escritores da África com menos de 40 anos, com potencial e talento para definir tendências na literatura africana. Em 2020, Wanner recebeu a medalha Goethe, tornando Wanner a primeira mulher africana a ganhar o prêmio. Em fevereiro de 2024, ela devolveu a medalha de Goethe, não como uma crítica ao Goethe Institute, mas sim ao governo alemão, citando a cumplicidade do governo na ocupação palestina em curso como uma insensibilidade ao sofrimento humano. Merece palmas da gente, né, por ter tido esse ato. Ela depositou a medalha em Nairobi, né? Mais do que isso, Zukiswa é referência em protagonismo da mulher negra africana na ficção, retratando uma África austral, moderna, pós-apartheid, mas ainda assombrada pelo racismo e machismo. Presença marcante em festivais literários internacionais, lutando pela afirmação da nova literatura africana e pela disseminação da leitura e da edição em continente. Temos a honra de recebê-la e será um prazer saber mais sobre os livros que você vem divulgar no Brasil. Madame, ditado pela IMA Editorial, e Amar, Casar e Matar, editado em coedição da Uniperiferia. exausta de ter de ser aí eu vou falar um pouquinho dos livros, tá bem? Madames, exausta de ter de ser uma supermãe para o filho, uma super amante para o marido e ainda uma super funcionária para o chefe. Tandy, enfim, se assume uma madame de nova elite negra sul-africana e decide contratar uma empregada, mas não será uma qualquer. Para chocar suas vizinhas de condomínio de luxo, será uma empregada branca. Tal ato trivial desencadeia uma série de eventos que põem em questão o que é ser mulher e o que é ser negra em uma sociedade que afirma ou finge ter deixado para trás o machismo e o preconceito racial. Fale um pouco sobre esse livro. Ok.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming through. And thank you, Professor Valère, who decided you weren't going to introduce yourself, although you look fantastic, and you introduced what you were wearing. For the sight impaired, I am Zukiswa Wanner. I do not know what Professor Valère meant when she said she has short hair, because I really have short hair. And I am wearing a peach pants and a blue shirt and a keffiyeh, which is red and white, and a jacket that's pink and peach and blue. And yeah. Anyway, regarding the madams, so I wrote it, I don't think I would write it quite the same way that I wrote it now. And it's almost 20 years later. I wrote it at a time when South Africa was still in some way hopeful. You could see the cracks, but we still had moments of hope. And I wanted to append, but even in that moment of hope, I wanted to highlight how there was a lot of racial inequality simmering under the rainbow nation idea. And I wanted to set it as well in a space where we're talking about humanity and feminisms, because there is this notion where in South Africa you'd be told that women are equal to men, and at least it looks like that on paper from the Constitution. But at workplaces, women are still earning less than men. So often, when women are walking the street, and when a woman is walking the street and she sees men, she has to cross over because she will get sexually harassed. Children and women are still like victims of rape. There is a lot of gender-based violence. There's a lot of femicides. And so I wanted to address this book from a position where we are unlearning, but also questioning, what was this rainbow dream that we had, and where can it go wrong? And I always think of writers not so much as prophets, but as people who are observing what's happening and maybe giving a warning of what is about to come. That's not prophetic, because anybody who reads the room can be able to tell what might actually end up happening.
Eu li uma carta sua em que você fala que teve incentivo de pessoas para que pudesse escrever ficção. Podia falar um pouco sobre isso?
Absolutely. I come from a history of writing journalism. And so when I was writing, when I went back to South Africa, I decided that I wanted to get into a newspaper because I'd been working at newspapers. I couldn't find a job, so I was working at a museum with a photographer and doing the archiving and the publicity. And one time, a writer, an old writer, he's late now, came and we got talking, and he said, "Oh, do you write?" And I said, "Yes, I do." So he said to me, "Oh, send me your work." So I sent him my work. And he said to me, "You should write fiction." And I said to him very arrogantly that I was too much of a realist to write fiction. But anyone who has ever practiced journalism and is also a novelist will tell you this. Fiction is a much more freeing art form than journalism, because as a journalist, you're consistently worried about being sued. And so there are certain things that you can't say. But I could say certain truths in fiction about problematic uncles, for instance, in Love, Marry, Kill. I could say about certain, racial issues that I wouldn't be able to say to my colleagues as addressed in both the Madams and Love, Marry, Kill. I could say certain things in, to men, and it would be through the characters. On the other hand, when I write nonfiction, it has to be factual and it has to be true, and perhaps that's why vignettes of a people in an apartheid state is much smaller than the novels.
E fale um pouco sobre escrever para crianças. Como é que você escreve para criança?
I think of people who are more cleverer than I am, generally, because children, I kind of think that we get more intelligent with each generation, and I think children are very clever. So every time I write, I also then think of the language. I can't say certain things in a children's book that I can say in adult novels. But also the language needs to be simple enough. If I'm talking to a child, if I've written a script, I usually get a child to read it. And if they're stumbling on a word, I know I either have to change it or maybe find a way of making it flow easier so that they're introduced to a new word while also not losing the story.
Fale das histórias que você escreve para criança.
Well, you're actually in luck. There was a young woman who was supposed to come today, Professor, so I do have one of the stories here. Yes, but I called it Refilwe. And it's set on a cave, in a cave on top of a mountain, as opposed to a tower. So, and it does a little play at something. I'll just read a little bit. I think our interpreter can get you. Once in the mountain kingdom of Lesotho, a husband and wife longed for a child. They visited sangomas, that's traditional doctors, brewed beer for the ancestors, and finally, the wife was expecting a baby. So this is, yeah. And what I then did with it is I tried to keep true to the story of Rapunzel. It was a process where we're adopting stories. And it went on, and up until Prince Tumi is dumped in the desert when he's blind after the stones have hurt his eyes. And the children usually, and of course, the old woman cuts off Rapunzel's dreadlocks. Because I think it's more convincing than Refilo's dreadlocks. I think the dreadlocks are more convincing than than Rapunzel's blonde hair, to be honest. Because they're stronger. Anyway, so that's what happened. But a few years ago, I think it was a year or two ago, we adopted it for stage in London. I didn't go to London because we are boycotting London now. And anybody who's supplying weapons to anybody. So when I did that adaptation, I changed it quite a lot. And I realized in Western fairy tales, which Rapunzel is part of, old women are always demonized. So the old woman is always a witch. So I decided I was going to do something a bit different with it. And what I did with the adaptation is where the old woman who's taken the child puts the child in a cave on top of a mountain because she's trying to protect her from a world of men who are really problematic. It's a problematic reason for her to do that, but she does it, And when Prince Tumi comes and she finds out, part of her outrage is she says Refilwe, which in Sotho means gift. She says Refilwe has been fraternizing with the royal family, and she's a Republican. She doesn't believe in kings. Yeah.
Fala um pouco do livro, do livro que você vai lançar agora, né? Tá bom?
Oh, okay. So I think with my novels, I'm always coming from a problematic. I always think of something that's problematic, and I see how it is that we can make it exciting or make us question ourselves and whatever we think. So now, we have two people, a man and a woman, and two other people, a man and a woman, and men from couple A and woman from couple B fall in love despite the fact that they're married to other people. What could go wrong? So I wanted to see how it is that we could write a story about problematic people or people in a problematic situation, but we find a way of actually being on their side. How would you do that? And so that is Love, Marry, Kill. I don't think it necessarily goes in that order. Sometimes I think what may have happened to them was marry, and then there was love with other people, and then and then there was kill, like a threat of killing. Yeah, but yeah, no, it was. So it's in that way, it's very light, which I think is something that's necessary at the time at this time, because we are going through so much serious stuff in the world. But it also does bring in some interesting, serious things. It brings in a young man who grows up in a house where the father is abusive towards the mother. And, there's always this narrative about how boys should grow up with their fathers, and they become better men. And he says he became a better man in spite of his father. So the one thing that scares him the most is getting into a situation where he might have to raise a hand to a woman because he doesn't want to be like his father, And so it makes you think about how human beings, children, sometimes we are, no matter how old we are, still children, in a lot of ways, because we carry on our hopes and our dreams and certain things that we were taught while we're growing up. We then have to unlearn it and say, okay, maybe this is wrong. Maybe I need to do better. Maybe I need to unthink this, Yeah.
Eu gostaria que você pudesse falar um pouco de ser mulher negra na África do Sul, neste momento. O que é ser mulher negra? Depois, pensar um pouco o mundo, como é que a gente se organiza no mundo como mulheres negras?
I think being a black woman in South Africa at the moment is a lot like being a black woman in Brazil. There is a food chain in how life is like. There is white man, white woman, whatever is in between, black man somewhere there, and then black woman at the bottom. And what happens in contemporary South Africa is, Professor, if you were invited in South Africa to head a university, I would say run, because you're probably being invited to clean up the mess of some white man. It's not a good look. And they will never give you credit for it, by the way. So I'm constantly thinking about allyship. And sometimes I have said, despite the fact that in South Africa, the black women have the numbers, we're the majority, making up, women make up 52% of the demography, and white women are only 8%, white people are only 8%, so white women are about half that. But, because we also have 66% women-headed household, sometimes that complicates things for black women, because not everybody will have the luxury of saying, you know what, I'm not going to be co-opted by the system, because we still need to feed our children. We need to send them to school. So there is a need to extend grace. But there's also sometimes, I think, places where we can say, maybe we'll protect you if you don't say anything. But don't say something that will end up harming the rest of us. So I think there is that. And understanding solidarities across, the borders is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do, whether it be with women in Brazil or in Haiti or in Trinidad and Tobago or in Angola or in the UK or in the US, wherever in Ghana. It's very important to understand that. And it's equally important to see where it is we can work together. I tend to find that there is a lot of generosity in academia and in artistic circles, not so much in corporate. I tend to find that the women in corporate want to be the only black at a dinner table. So when you get there, they'll say, "Professor, what are you doing here?" Because they expected to be the only ones there. What are your experiences?
No Brasil, o que temos no Brasil? As mulheres negras estão em pleno efervescência, elas estão se descobrindo como mulheres negras, se reafirmando enquanto identidade negra no Brasil nesse momento. Então, a gente tem uma situação muito, muito diferente do que tínhamos há 10 anos, 15 anos atrás. Então, é uma situação que traz, junto com essa reafirmação como mulher negra, perspectivas de ganhos e perdas também, né? Ganhos no que tange ser mulher negra e lutar por isso, como perda das questões que elas deveriam saber, né? E que não sabem, né? Então, a gente tem uma perspectiva, nesse momento, positiva de ser mulher negra, mas ainda em fase de construção. Por quê? Porque ainda tem muita coisa para ser construída em conjunto com, obviamente, a gente fala de uma branquitude, né? Porém, ela ainda tem muito o que fazer, tem muita coisa a ser feita ainda e coisas para serem conquistadas. Então, a gente está num momento, eu acho que é crescente, mas ainda com muita coisa para ser feita.
So, on Saturday, I was in Heliopolis, and at the library there, and the librarian told me that one of those stories of the young girls in the community where the father was insulting the child about, and this father would always insult this one child in the family about her being too black. Is colorism an issue in Brazil?
Claro que a cor da pele é um problema nesse país, porque construímos esse país porque fomos escravizados, né? Os meus antepassados foram escravizados. No entanto, saímos da escravidão sem receber absolutamente nada e fomos jogados, como dizia Florestan Fernandes, à sua própria sorte. O fato de termos a pele escura e o fato de você ter a pele mais escura te coloca numa condição muito, muito, muito ruim, porque não tem o reconhecimento de que aquela pessoa é capaz de fazer determinadas coisas. Veja, a gente está há 20 anos, nesse momento, há 20 anos, mais ou menos, nas políticas de ações afirmativas nas universidades. Estou falando 20 anos desde que se implementou o primeiro programa. No entanto, nós somos hoje, a maioria que entram na universidade, nós somos maioria de mulheres negras que entram na universidade. No entanto, tem muito caminho ainda para ser conquistado. Muitas coisas para serem feitas e muitas coisas para que a gente consiga ser respeitada e para que a gente seja tratada como um igual, né? Será uma longa batalha dentro desse país, porque é um país racista, sexista, machista. Então, a gente tem uma situação que ela é muito aguda para as mulheres negras, e elas também, parecido com a África do Sul, são mulheres solos e que cuidam das suas casas e que dão conta de uma perspectiva bastante desigual, numa condição que a coloca como vítima, né? Vítimas de uma sociedade extremamente racista. É uma sociedade que prima por uma aparência de igualdade, quando ela é extremamente desigual. Então, se aprofunda a perspectiva de ser uma mulher negra. No entanto, aquilo que eu disse, a gente tem caminhado na perspectiva de superar algumas coisas, justamente pela nova juventude que tá reivindicando melhores condições de vida e trabalho.
I have to ask, do you absolutely love the younger people as much as I do? Because I have found, I keep thinking that I wish when I was in my 20s, I was as assertive as they were, that maybe like now we wouldn't have half the problems that we'd have if my generation of women had been like pushing back as much as they do.
Eu acho que sim. Eu acho que ser jovem é ser destemido e não ter medo de nada, né? Então, a juventude que hoje se coloca como a geração Z, né? Não sei aí, mas é uma juventude que tem galgado boas coisas, sobretudo da população negra, e que eles também são muito assertivos, são extremamente assertivos. Então, eu acho que tem uma perspectiva boa. O que tem de ruim é a forma como o governo trata a juventude negra, e tem uma violência muito grande, sobretudo no Rio de Janeiro, que a violência com jovens negros é uma coisa inacreditável no país. Parece que as balas só atingem os corpos negros.
I became aware of this. I hadn't known about that, but I became aware of this during 2020. I was mentioning earlier that I started an online virtual literary festival as something fun to do during lockdown. And I did it because I wanted, I knew I wouldn't be able to see a lot of my friends at literary festivals like we normally do. And but I thought to myself as well, we had a captured audience. People were all at home and they were online. And this would be my way of introducing them to writers that I loved, that I was sure they didn't know. So we did the first one, and it was a lot of fun. And we set up a virtual green room, as you do. And we had writers from Angola. And so we had writers from Lusophone and Francophone and Anglophone Africa. And so when on May 25, 2020, when George Floyd got shot in the US. Yes. We decided we're going to, in the green room, that we're going to write a solidarity letter with Black people in America, and we try to get as many writers as possible to sign it. And it was during the course of that conversation that we found out how many young Black people are getting shot by police in Brazil. And the reason is because we'd had a language barrier. But it seems to me, part of that is very much where the world has become more right-wing, very neoliberal. And, in the 80s, in the United Kingdom, for instance, you had somebody like Margaret Thatcher, who was considered right-wing. We had people like Ronald Reagan, who were considered right-wing. Now, the people in the Democratic Party in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and those in the Labour Party in the United Kingdom are more right than Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, And so for the left, it's a constant battle. And because it's a constant battle, the police is more tight, but worse than that, there is the victimization of the poor all over the world. And the poor are so often Black and brown, In South Africa in 2012, we had miners killed for asking for a living wage. There's a fence. Today is June 16 in South Africa. So June 16 is that was the day of the Soweto uprisings 49 years ago. And the apartheid regime used to have this fence with spikes that they would put in neighborhoods to fence people off so that they couldn't jump and escape. The fence was manufactured, it still exists, manufactured in Israel, because Israel was the biggest seller of weapons to apartheid South Africa. And in South African townships, it's called a stop nonsense. I mention this because this fence was put, the mine workers decided that they were going to leave the mine accommodation, and they went up a hill. They said, we're protesting, we're fighting, but we're going away from the mine accommodation so that you can't think that we owe you anything. So they went up. And as they were negotiating, there was an order from the above. And the order was essentially that the police should not let them get away with it, and the leaders should be taken out. So the head of police then changed the order from this negotiation, and they were barricaded with this stop nonsense fence. And 46 people were killed. 46 minors. The person who made that order was a mine shareholder who happens to be president of my country today.
Nossa, que história difícil. Porém, no Brasil, a polícia ela tem matado os menores, as crianças. Eles dizem que é bala perdida, né? Mas eu não sei até onde é bala perdida, né? Porque é uma mortalidade muito assertiva. Então, são crianças, são jovens. Eu temo que daqui a um tempo a gente não tenha mais, a gente vai ter uma lacuna no que tange os jovens negros no Brasil, porque eles são mortos antes de terem direito a viver. Entendeu? Então, você está contando uma história triste, eu estou te contando uma história triste também, porque no Brasil a mortalidade, a violência com os jovens, adolescentes e crianças negras é algo inimaginável para quem está fora do país imaginar que eles são mortos da forma como eles são.
You know, I believe it because I think part of the marketing for Brazil is very much the same as the marketing for South Africa. It's a racially harmonious country. Everybody loves each other, you know. We sing Kumbaya all the time. So, but I suppose ultimately what we may need to do, and as dark as the days have been, over the last 2 years as we watched a genocide happening, I think maybe we're being asked to find our humanity again, to be in solidarity, not just with your friends and neighbors, but with the entire world wherever you see wrong happening, and to speak up and to fight out against it and realize that the enemy is the same. The reason why I think war exists is because capitalists want to sell their weapons. And the more wars we have, the more they profit. There are no guns that are manufactured in the favelas. There are no guns that are manufactured in the townships of South Africa. There are no guns that are manufactured in the mines of DRC. There are no guns that are manufactured in Haiti. There are no guns that are manufactured in Palestine. And yet, what we are seeing constantly is death. I say that wrongly, killings. There are no guns that are manufactured in the inner cities in the United States of America, and yet we constantly see killings. So I think maybe we need to ignore the borders that were imposed on us and understand international solidarities and speak up for each other and understand that there are no profits. If you are for you of you who are shareholders in mine companies, there are not enough profits that can explain the coal exported to Israel that's lighting up a genocide. We can't explain that. You can't justify it, you know. There are not enough profits that can explain removing people from their houses so that you can build a park, allegedly, or gentrify it. So, I think if you can turn up on a march to legalize marijuana in Sao Paulo, you should equally turn up to a march to protect people who are being removed from their homes.
Eu gostaria que você tenha um livro sobre a Palestina, não tem? Pode falar um pouco do livro sobre a Palestina?
Yes, I can. A few years ago, this is yours, by the way, you can have it. A few years ago, in 2023, I traveled to Palestine for a literary festival. And in Palestine, because Palestinians are not allowed to travel without permission from Israel, what this festival does is that everybody travels, the writers travel to different places in Palestine, because if you have an American passport or a South African passport or a British passport, you have more freedom of movement than a Palestinian with their ID. Yeah. So we traveled across and we went, we're in Ramallah, which has some semblance of normalcy, but not quite, because that's where the PLO is. We're in Bethlehem, we're in Jerusalem, we're in Lid, we're in Haifa, we're in Hebron as well. And even as a person coming from a country with a history of apartheid, nothing quite prepares you for Palestine. They have different number plates. Israeli number plates can go wherever they want. Palestinians need to move on certain roads. The distance between Ramallah and Jerusalem is 20-25 minutes. But Palestinians who stay in Ramallah and go to school in Jerusalem or work in Jerusalem or vice versa have to wake up at 4 in the morning if they want to be at work by 8 so that they can meet the Kalandia checkpoint. It's, you know, when you see a gun cocked at you, at an old person, by somebody who is 20 or 21 because they are just exercising power and they don't even see the humanity. When you see somebody, a young person, humiliating somebody old enough to be their grandparent, you know. And I think in Brazil, as in South Africa, one of the most painful things is Christian Zionists. Because Christian Zionists believe that they must side with Israel because it's in the Bible. I'm not quite sure what Christ this is. A Christ of oppression, a Christ of genocide, a Christ of settler colonialism. Because you see, during apartheid, the Afrikaners also said that they were the chosen people. Anyway, so I initially wrote this, and I finished writing it on June 30, 2023. So way before October 7. And and I'm going to read the blurb of it because that's actually what I said about it in that time when I wrote it, before October 7th. In May 2023, South African author Zukiswa Wanner was a guest of the Palestine Festival of Literature. Coming from a country with a history of apartheid, she should have had an inkling of what to expect, but her experiences were more than she had bargained for. As Palestinians are not always permitted to travel across checkpoints, Palestine Festival of Literature brought her and other festival participants to different parts of the Palestinian territories for literary engagement with audience. Vignettes is her witness account of contemporary settler colonialism, genocide, and a world that's damned by its refusal to see or hear the pleas for a truly free Palestine. So I wrote that before, whatever. And during lockdown, I had made friends with this guy, Daniel. He had asked me to do some guest editing for Peripherus, and it also been very helpful in introducing me to Brazilian writers, because after that May 25, when we did the solidarity letter against police shootings, I decided that I was going to change the look of this online festival. And we're not just going to look at Africa, but we're going to look at Africa and its diasporas. So we started having people like Conceição Evaristo. We had like a whole lot of other Brazilian writers on the platform. So I sent it to him immediately after I finished. I finished writing it on June 30. And he translated it, and we had it out. And I had said even from the get-go that whatever sales we make, and we've maintained this, whatever sales we make, we give them to the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, because there's something absolutely vulgar about profiting from people's oppression. So just like pay money, just take the money that it takes to print or whatever, and then the rest we give. Anyway, because I was coming here, and my publisher is a bit of a slave driver, he asked me to do, and I mean that in the nicest way. I don't know what's nice about it, but I mean it in a positive way. He asked me to do a postscript. You know, he said, do a postscript now with the reflection of October 7 having happened and everything that we've been experiencing ever since. I'm not going to obviously read it because it's there, but I shall just do this last bit so that we also don't waste the time for translators and in case anybody wants to ask questions. The time we live in is dark, very dark. We continue to see killings, displacements, oppression by a demonic and unfeeling enemy that has little regard for human lives. All of us with an ounce of humanity have, at some point or other, felt that it's also very hopeless. But to lose hope is to make Zionism, capitalism, and the military-industrial complex win. To lose hope is to let down every person who has been killed by our collective enemy, and not to be around to hold the enemy and their proxies to account when the day of justice comes. It is a very long hour before dawn, but dawn is coming. And when it comes, it will end with justice and freedom for the people of Palestine, of Congo, of Sudan, of Lebanon, of Haiti, of Kashmir. It shall end with justice and freedom for 99% and of us all, and just desserts for the 1%.
Nossa. Com isso, a gente termina a nossa conversa e eu abro para que o público... Eu esqueço. Eu abro para que o público possa fazer algumas questões. Não muito, mas a gente teria a possibilidade de fazer algumas questões. Para Zukiswa? Alguém?
Olá, boa noite. Muito obrigada pelas palavras, o que aprendi muito essa noite com você. Estou me sentindo, na verdade, privilegiada de poder te ouvir. E eu gostaria de saber como você percebe a relação entre as escritoras no continente africano. Se tem havido trocas, né? Qual é a qualidade dessas trocas, onde elas acontecem. Como você sente, né, essa nova geração de mulheres que hoje escrevem e publicam a partir do continente africano?
Teve trocas maravilhosas que aconteceram. Nós temos festivais literários. E é interessante, em Kinshasa, que é um dos mais longos, no Congo, temos na Nigéria, em Lagos também. Em Nairobi também temos alguns festivais, também em Hargeisa. Na África do Sul nós temos alguns também. Em Namíbia também, com a sua população de 12 pessoas. Então, isso tem acontecido e eu acho que o que eu realmente admiro são escritores que geralmente, deliberadamente, estão recomendando uns aos outros para as coisas. Então, se for para escrever coisas ou em festivais, geralmente eles dão apoio uns aos outros. E ao erguer a voz contra genocídio, isso também, não é? Também fazendo silêncio.
Boa noite. Também quero agradecer pela palestra, foi muito boa. Estou ansiosa para ler os livros dela, agora, Zuki. E eu queria te perguntar sobre como que você acha que está sendo, talvez, a aproximação ou o tratamento do erotismo feminino pelas escritoras africanas. Eu fiquei interessada porque você falou da sua história, né, dos casais que eram casados, mas dois se apaixonam, e eu percebo que aqui no Brasil as escritoras negras também estão, claro, tem uma escrita política, mas eu acho que também estão no momento de começar a pensar o desejo, né, e o desejo da mulher negra parece ser cheio de armadilhas, né, a gente não cair numa fetichização. Então, eu queria saber como tem sido na África, se você já tem lido ou tem escrito também, me interessa bastante.
Certainly, I have, but another person who did very well is an author called Yewande Omotosho. Yewande has this novel where a woman dies, and she was single and stayed alone. And then her mother comes to pick up for her. And she's a good conservative mother, black mother. And then she finds that her child was into S&M, sadomasochism and masochism, you know? So that all these chains and whatever, and it was a fascinating book, fascinating novel. So there is quite a lot. I think we're breaking free from the conservativeness of not talking about sex. As I'm constantly asking people at, whenever I'm in a room full of, black men and black women, I always say, I need to understand why, as human beings, we are so comfortable with violence that we're okay with our children watching wrestling, for instance, on television, but we close their eyes to them watching affection, to them seeing passion, to them seeing people kissing. And thank you so much for coming through. And you too, ma'am.
Mais alguém quer fazer uma pergunta?
Eu queria saber se a tua fala carrega muita esperança, né? E você fala muito nessa palavra, mas ao mesmo tempo você acabou de falar, né, que de nós estarmos confortáveis com a violência de modo geral, né? Como você vê hoje a situação, como levar esperança no dia a dia, assim?
So, when I was talking about, thank you so much for that question, by the way. When I was talking about being comfortable with violence, I was meaning in terms of, watching it, like on television. But it's also, I think when we don't talk about something, we do not unlearn it. So, because I'm mentioning it, I think all of you will think twice when there is violence and you're okay with children watching it, but you try to cover their eyes when people are kissing on television. But I am eternally hopeful. I think to be an artist is to hope. Either you hope or you commit suicide in despair. And I'm hopeful because sometimes you think you're the only person who is feeling the way you do. But the last 2 years has shown me that there is so many people who are feeling exactly as I do, who are feeling the despair, but who also believe that, there is something that can happen. The number of people that turned up yesterday at the protest march for Palestine is an indication. The fact that one of your own, Tiago, with an 8-month-old child, said he was going to leave his child so that he could go on a flotilla and try to deliver food to Gaza. Yes, they did not succeed. But do you know what that did? What type of thing that lit up? And it was the second one that had failed, because remember there was the other Freedom Flotilla. What that did is it lit up and gave an idea to civil society in Malaysia. And today reports came out, Malaysia is sending 1,000 ships with food to Gaza. Now, between trying to fight Iran and Yemen, I'm not sure that they'll be able to stop an entire 1,000 ships going to Gaza, So at least something, I'm hoping, will go through. So that to me is the hope that I keep carrying. And I think it's the hope that many of us who have any ounce of humanity are carrying right now. And I find that, additionally, we're kinder to each other in a way that didn't exist maybe 5-6 years ago when we're very individualistic. So, yeah. And because of this, I like to think that people will realize that neoliberalism and capitalism and the profits of one individual over communities and just living for today at the expense of the environment of the future is not it.
Mais alguém?
Eu vou fazer a pergunta em português, Vou tentar. Penso de duas formas e queria saber, primeiro, quais são as suas influências, pensando influências na linha de Harold Bloom, de English. E dentro disso quero ver essa influência tanto do campo literário quanto também, não sei se seria forçar muito, mas o campo literário e um pouco também da linha política, enquanto escritora.
I'm very lucky that my parents were very political. My father was in exile as a Encontro ANC soldier. And my mother was left Zimbabwe and was in Zapu before Zimbabwean independence. Because of that, I have grown up listening to stories, being told. One of the greatest mistakes that I ever did as a child was to read George Orwell's 1984 when I was 10 years old, because I've been petrified of rats ever since. On the literary front, I have been lucky also because my parents, I didn't like this when I was a kid, but in retrospect, it was really absolutely marvelous. My parents never used to buy me dolls. They used to buy me books. And so I count among my literary mothers people like June Jordan, certainly Ama Taidu, because both of them were artists, but they were also activists. You know, they spoke up when injustice happened. Ama Taidu was made Minister of Education after the coup that put J.J. Rawlings in power in Ghana. Somebody came to her and told her that uniforms needed to be the same because somebody had fabric, I guess, that they wanted to sell. Ama Taidu refused and she quit and she went into exile, first in Kenya, then in Zimbabwe. I also count amongst my literary parents people like Nuruddin Farah and Wole Soyinka. And I like that Soyinka constantly is able to change his perspective about things. You know, when you read one of his first novels, The Interpreters, it has seeds of homophobia. If you talk to Soyinka now, he's constantly like willing to change his mind, and that to me is a sign of an artist to emulate and admire. So I'm lucky that they're also very generous. They're willing to listen to younger people. They read younger people and stuff. And, you know, I certainly hope that now is considered one of the older writers, that I'll do the same for the younger writers. And yeah, be kind enough. But yeah, no, and just really, I'm also just inspired by the ordinary people that I meet, to be honest, not just writers. I have met immense generosity of spirit. And so ultimately, it's why I believe that the world is largely good. Human beings are largely decent people. And, you know, because we live in a world of robotics and so forth and so on, I'm also very much believing that those who aren't, they are Ziobots.
Só isso? Então, eu quero agradecer muito, dizer que a noite foi incrível, maravilhosa. Gostaria de dizer a você que estamos muito orgulhosos de ter uma escritora africana nas dependências da Universidade Estadual Paulista, dizer que é uma honra e boa sorte. Tudo de bom para você, tá bem?
Thank you very much, everyone. Muito obrigada for coming through on a cold evening. And thank you very much, Professor, for this amazing, beautiful conversation. And this is certainly my first time in Brazil, but I guarantee you, I shall keep coming and questioning and holding you accountable, and I hope you hold me accountable too on how we're doing on our humanity and being kinder to each other. Thank you so much.